Well, good morning, gentlemen. I don't see any ladies in here, so we'll say gentlemen for the duration of the meeting. My name is Paul Jackson. Randy talked to me and wanted me to speak on risk resource management. And I met Randy doing a Flightline television show a couple years ago, which was in production just a few years ago. You can still buy it on iTunes. That helps me pay for my airplane gas. Randy asked me to speak on risk resource management. And the reason I accepted was because I'm an airline guy. I'm a captain at Southwest. I've got about 20,000 hours of flight time. And I can also tell you I'm not a safety guy. What does that mean? That means I don't get a kick out of a laser pointer and talking about safety in front of people, because that's every safety guy's dream, is to have a laser pointer in an audience. So the reason I'm here is that when risk resource management came to our airline and to my career, the first year I hated it. I thought it was stupid, I thought it was dumb. The second year, I started trying to learn about it because I knew the third year they're going to test me on it. So what I found out along the way as we went through the journey is that it does make sense, and it is something that can carry over. And when Randy talked to me today, I'd like to bring that forward because it's clear that it's becoming part of general aviation, and I'll get to that in the presentation. Red to green. The whole theory of this is red to green. Red to green is where you are in the cockpit at that moment. When we back out of that, and you'll see this as we go through the presentation, is what is it that puts you into the red? And we'll talk about being in the red, and that is basically that you're not performing at maximum efficiency, not making good decisions, and you're not doing well. Green is where everything is good, and that's where we want to be. So red, green, and the old duct tape. So why did the airlines move to risk resource management? And it's the US Air story. I'm going to caveat this by saying that the US Air story, you could substitute the word Delta, Continental, United, American, Midway, Southwest. You can substitute any airline name in here. Why is the US Air story up here? Because on 20 September 1989, they had their first wreck. Not their first wreck, but the first in a sequence of wrecks. The crew incorrectly trimmed the rudder for takeoff and were forced to abort the takeoff. The aircraft overran the runway. 2 of the 55 passengers were killed. All right? The aircraft was out of trim on takeoff. Partially pilot error, partially system error, but regardless, the airplane went off the runway. February 1991, a 737-300 landed on top of a Metro liner on 24 left at LAX. There's 24 right, 24 left. They were cleared to land on 24 right. They lined up on 24 left. They ended up getting cleared for 24 left shortly before landing, but they weren't. Again, I'm not going to blame the crew, and that's the one thing you got to get used to in these accidents, is you're not talking about the crew as in fault. You're talking about the crew as in what happened to them bad. What happened to them bad was they requested 24 left. The controller gave it to them, but they didn't have their situational awareness up high because there was an airplane on position and hold on that runway, and they landed on top of it. Unfortunately, the captain, as you can see, they hit a building to the left of 24 left, and the captain was killed along with all the passengers on the Metroliner and the SkyWest crew, and then some of the passengers on that. LaGuardia, Fokker 70, I believe, takeoff, ice on the wings, improper de-icing procedures, improper crew management, bad day, took off, really never got airborne. They actually crashed on the airport property and drifted into the water, and 24 of the 47 passengers were killed, including the 3 crew. 1994, heavy wind shear, DC-9-30, I believe. Crew attempted to go around, couldn't get out of it, ended up smacking the airplane into the ground very softly, but the airplane split, and you can see that they had several fatalities. The last one in the sequence, I know this is getting old and it seems like I'm a tin kicker, but this is the last in the sequence. This is the rudder hardover of a 737 going into Pittsburgh. All passengers and crew perished, and you can tell from the impact that it was a tail followed the nose in type accident. It was almost vertical when it hit. And again, some crew management issues, but overall the overriding factor was mechanical. So where was US Air? And I'm lucky enough to know some folks that were at US Air. We also have some contract people that now work for my airline that came from US Air training at this time. In a period of 3 years and 7 months, they had 5 hull losses. They had 238 fatalities in their passengers. And again, I'm not picking on US Air, but I'm talking about airlines, and I'm talking about what happened here. So they had to look inside. This traumatic sequence of events caused them to look inside their systems and see what was happening. Well, what was happening at US Air? What was happening is they'd merged 3 airlines and 3 cultures: Piedmont, US Air Allegheny, and PSA. And the old joke was that the US Air guys could get the Piedmont guys to take the gun racks out of the 737 and the PSA guys to wear socks, they could make money. So they were different, very, very, very different cultures. A California airline, a Carolina airline, and a Northeast type airline. And they were very different cultures. They had 11 types of aircraft. I'm not going to read you the whole alphabet, but they had 11 different types of aircraft. So you had 3 training centers, you had 3 sets of checklists, you had 3 sets of standards of how to run an airplane, and you had 11 different variants. Then when you put the whole soup together, everybody started being able to transition and bid different airplanes, and you had a bad soup going on. Throw into the mix outside of this is right around the time the economy started turning and people were starting to hit the street. Jobs were threatened, so you not only had people flying together, you had people getting furloughed. So you had people in the cockpit who didn't like each other. I have a couple of ex-Continental pilots here who refuse to call themselves United pilots. I won't make you stand up, but there is tension in the cockpit when you merge 2 airlines between the pilots, because seniority is king at an airline. So did it cause a crash? No. But was a contributor factor? It could have been. So what did US Air start doing? Well, in the industry, in the military, and in different safety type jobs, there was early modeling, and they started looking like this. If anybody can tell me what that is, I would really like to know what it is, because it ends in an airplane with a bad symbol on it. But they started going through. It was very complex, and those of us that were being briefed on it didn't get much out of it. Failed absence or defenses, unsafe supervision, preconditions for safety acts, and apparently it looks like Swiss cheese, and then we have latent failures. It isn't something that you would look at this and you go, oh yeah, I can take this and put it right into my cockpit and I'll use this. It was very complicated, and it was very, very challenging. But some things were happening that came out of US Air and started permeating through the airlines that looked a lot like risk resource management. We went from check rides to line-oriented flight training and performance-based training. That means that at the airline, instead of going in and being asked what the start limit was on the engine, you started the engine, and then they gave you a failure. So that's the simplest way to break it down. It wasn't, as we called it, stump the dummy training. We went from stump the dummy training to actually doing what we did on the line and then adding additive conditions to it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. Uh-oh, that's a bad thing. We went from intimate systems knowledge. Why did my projector go off? Does anyone know? Let me go like this. Whew, thank God. That would have been a long day, guys. I do a lot of things, but I don't memorize slides. We went from aircraft or intimate systems-based knowledge to procedural knowledge. So when I was talking about oil pressure limits, temperature limits, to those types of things, to actually knowing what was in the correct reference handbook when the engine overtemmed. So we went from the actual limit to the actual process. We went from aircraft-specific procedures to airline standard procedures. I talked about that at US Air. So when you were in a DC-9 and you would transition to a 767, it was a whole new airplane. And in fact, at US Air, that was a US Air airplane, that was a Piedmont airplane. So you had Piedmont procedures transitioning over. And over time, US Air was able to develop US Air specific procedures. CRM came more online. It was actually out there quite a bit earlier. We've gone from Sky God, where the captain makes all the decisions, to cockpit resource management. And the worst part about cockpit resource management is that if you really need cockpit resource management, you don't do it. So it's a little bit hard to implement, but it does work. We went from minimums and maximums for operations to risk assessment and operational management. And I want you to remember this, because it'll come up later when I'm talking about general aviation and how it applies to us. When we fly into an airport now and the company makes the decision to no longer fly there, it used to be based on one thing: visibility, minimum we go, above minimums, minimums we don't, below minimums we don't go, above minimums we go. Braking below minimums we don't go, braking above. Now what we do is we have an operations type people that look at risk and they measure it and they say, it's windy, the visibility is low, you know what, we're going to cease operations at that airport. So they start looking at the additive factors rather than just minimums and maximums, which is really good. We also do the same thing for destinations. We're adding a lot of flying in the Caribbean at my airline right now. We have cities that we're adding that my friends here at United can fly to today. They're on the 737, they fly to it no problem, no limitations. My airline, I have to have specific training for that base, and I also have to have currency in that base. Why? Because I've never flown there, my airline's never flown there, we have a farther flight to get there, we're going to have less fuel. Again, add, risk factor, and they call that airport yellow, special qualification. Anyone can do it with special qualification. If it's red, it's an aircraft specific, destination specific group of pilots that can fly there. It's very limited. So it's risk based, which is really good. This is where we ended up. It looks a lot like the industry model. I've seen it in different places. There's a target, which is right here, which is where we are. There's resource blocks, which we'll talk about, which are right here. And then there's ABCDs, or the actions, and the return to green, which come from the actions. So if you file that away, just take a look at that, and we'll take a look at where we can go with this. I'll tell you where the airline went with this, and then we'll talk about it from general aviation. It's a red, green, yellow, and if you can imagine yourself when you show up at the airplane, you're ready to fly. We're going to go out here. I know it's my airplane. Everything's good. 737. I'm showing up at work. I'm in the green. I got my cup of coffee. I got a first officer. I got a nice crew. I'm in the green. I'm ready to go flying. Okay. When I'm in the green, my situation awareness is high. They hand me the weather pack. I'm looking at stuff. I'm checking out the route. I'm doing all my stuff. I'm getting myself. I'm really on top of my game and ready to go. All my resources are in place. I've got my manual in my iPad. I've got my charts on my iPad, which again is a nice resource to have instead of books. I've got a good first officer who's well trained. I've got a flight attendant who will keep me briefed. I've got the company dispatcher who's working with me. I've got all of those resources in place, plus the tools in the airplane. I've got an autopilot. I've got a moving map. I've got radar. I've got all kinds of resources to help me stay in the green. So that when we do have errors and when things start going wrong, I see them. My eyes are this big, and I start seeing things, and I know what's going on. When a pilot moves into the yellow, or a flight crew member moves into the yellow, you start missing the risk factors. And when I talk about risk factors, I'm talking about the idea that you're not identifying risk. You're task saturated. You're starting to get your head down. You're starting to close in a little bit, and you're starting to miss things. When I say you're missing a risk, it doesn't mean you're making a mistake. You're missing something that might come up and bite you later on. And your awareness and your SA is starting to come down. Your attention narrows. You start focusing in on trying to close that discontinuity in the route on your FMS system. You're up there looking at the light up above on a hydraulic pump that keeps flashing on and off, and you don't know why. And all of a sudden your situation starts narrowing. And it can happen to a crew, it can happen to an individual. And the right resources might not be in place. In other words, I don't have the answer in front of me. I got to go dig for it as to why is the stupid light coming on in the PSEU, and I don't even know what PSEU stands for, but the PSEU light is on and I need to know what that is. So I need to do an assessment, which we'll talk about, and I need to reevaluate. I need to figure out where I'm at, and I need to figure out, because I may need to reprioritize. I may need to go, you know what, that light's going to stay on. I'm going to fly the jet. You know what, I'm going to take care of the light. You're going to do these types of things. And so let's talk about what happens when we go a little bit farther. If you don't reassess in the yellow, you can get into the red. And until you see it and you get to watch it, and that's the hard part about general aviation is you don't get to watch yourself. You get to watch other crews. And I get to watch in the simulator, and I'll tell you a little story about going down to Mexico here in a little bit. It's interesting to watch someone because they don't know they're in the red. They think they're doing great. And it's almost like hypoxia. They start and they start closing in, and they are killing it on this problem. Meanwhile, stuff is just going by. We're missing radio calls. We're missing calls from each other. We're flying past our top of descent. I don't know if anybody remembers that one. with the Northwest crew. You're missing all kinds of cues. You're missing stuff. You're in the red. And the hard part about it is that your self-assessment is very low. So your situational awareness, you're down to tunnel vision. You're really just focused on that issue. And it really starts closing in. And it really starts happening. And again, it's a significant indication that you need to reevaluate where you're at and reprioritize what you're doing and take a look at what you're doing. So what are the things that move you there? Real simple. We'll talk about these real quick because we'll talk about them for you later on. Task loading. For us in the airlines, it's passenger issues. Okay? I just was going to Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Believe me, talking to these guys would laugh because they do it all the time at United, but I'm not used to talking to people in a foreign language on the radio. So I got a passenger acting up in the back. He wants to give his girlfriend an IV because she's dehydrated. No, you can't do that on an airplane. You know, we don't allow that. Plus, he wanted to use our medical kit. So the flight attendant, ding, 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 ding. We're briefing the approach going into Punta Cana. We're about 10 minutes out. Ding, ding, ding. We're getting loaded up. Finally, I had to say, here's the deal. Paramedics are going to meet the airplane. Security is going to meet the airplane. And eventually, the idiot grabbed the flight attendant by the chin and pushed her up against the wall and said, "You're denying medical care for my girlfriend. I demand it right now." And that turned into a big deal. So you can't touch a flight crew member. Don't do that. But anyways, we were getting loaded up front, and it was funny, and the old line in aviation is I went from bored to overloaded in about 30 seconds. We were absolutely bored. It was a 4-hour flight, 3-hour and 50-minute flight down there. And we're down there just navigating and talking and doing our stuff. And we do have a window to do our briefing, so we were well within that window comfortably. And I had been going through my iPad and lining up my charts, and luckily there's only 16 arrivals into Punta Cana, and they don't tell you which one you're going to get, so you don't know which one to brief. So luckily it's the third world. Additive conditions. What are things that add to the condition? And I'm just going to look at a couple of these. It's any factor that adds to your task loading or causes you a distraction. Your environment, your equipment problems, your operation. You know, how many of us have XM in the airplane? You get to listen to music. It's great until it isn't. Then it's a distraction. So that's an additive factor. Anytime you have someone talking in the airplane, you have a nice conversation going on, it's an additive factor. That happens between us, and we have a rule that below 10,000 feet, we have to go sterile. We can't do anything else but the job. And then you have crew and pilot factors. And these are such as yourself. This is the self-assessment, the test you do when you go to work. Is this the fourth leg of the day for us? Are we 7 hours in, block hour-wise, and 15 hours into a duty day? Yeah, we can. Truck drivers have better rules than pilots for safety. We actually have longer duty days than truck drivers. So are you gassed? Are you tired? Are you really fighting it on the way in? Is it a new guy in the right seat? Is it a new guy in the left seat? Is it a really senior bitter guy in the right seat? Could be. Is it a transition guy? And I'll tell you a little story about that guy that was in the right seat with me. He was a 51-year-old, my age, 51-year-old captain at AirTran, and when we merged with AirTran, he lost his captain seat in the merger. He didn't like me. I was in the union. He didn't like me. He didn't like me from the get-go. He put up with me, but he didn't like me. We had that going on right from the get-go. And eventually I kind of broke the ice because I'm a nice guy and I bought him coffee or something. And we were able to break the ice. But this guy had been a captain for about 7 years. And one thing happens when you're a captain for 7 years, you kind of forget that you're pretty busy over there in the right seat. You're getting the clearance, you're loading the FMC, you're doing the walk around, you're doing all the stuff. What's the captain doing? Oh, he's getting coffee, right? No, we're doing the decision-making stuff. I mean, there's a lot that we do too. But if you're an FO and you used to be a captain, and you're watching the captain sitting over there, you're a little crabby. So this guy was crabby, and we had that going on. The other thing that I noticed about him was he went from the green to the yellow in about half a heartbeat. He was one of the fastest guys that I ever saw go from bored to overloaded. And we were going into Mexico, and I started watching him, and he was trying to get a clearance, and he couldn't understand the controller. And he couldn't understand the controller, and he couldn't understand the controller. And so what did he do? He got mad at the controller. And he said, "Do you have someone that speaks English?" That's not a thing to say to someone in Mexico. I'm just going to give you a hint. That doesn't help you get your clearance any faster, because there's about 4 Uniteds and Americans that got their clearance before us. So I said, I'll tell you what, why don't I ask, and then we'll both listen. And so we'll try to get this done. What he was doing was he hadn't done his work beforehand, he hadn't used his resources. He didn't even have the clearance out. He didn't have the written clearance that we had from dispatch out. He was just trying to copy it onto a blank sheet of paper. Bad move in a foreign country. You need to have your clearance out so you understand when he says, direct sugugu, direct wogudu, and you're like, what the hell is he saying? But when you have it written down, you can go, oh, I think that is a guru. Okay, now I know what that is. Little tricks like that. But he went from board to overloaded. And it carried on because when we were going out, he was rattled. He was behind the airplane. And I turned and I looked at him and I said, you know what? It's a 3-hour flight back up to Chicago. We ready? Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, let's go. Boom, we go. Boom, we taxi out. And I can tell he's reading the checklist, he's missing radio calls, and he was in the yellow, and it was hard to get him back to the green. And he'll make a much better captain than he does a first officer, I can tell you that. So that'll be good. So let's talk about the resource blocks. At the airline, they're real simple here, and I know you can't see this, so I'll read them to you. The first block out here in the farthest is policies, procedures, and flows. And I'll talk about flows when we get to general aviation a little bit, but policies and procedures. This is real big in an airline, policies and procedures. Believe me, there's lots of nerds that love talking up in front of people about safety, but they love, one thing they only love more is writing manuals. And they love writing manuals, and I think they get paid by the word. So they're big, thick manuals, but they're policies and they're procedures, and they keep us within a set of guardrails, and they protect us, and then we can use those. We kind of rail against them because we're pilots, but we like them. Checklists. Checklists have changed a lot since we started at the airline. These guys here, my United buddies here, used to be on the 727. I marveled at the 727 and a 3-man crew. It had the longest checklist known to man. It was just epic. And it was just long, and it included everything, and it included everything. They've really, modern checklists for airlines have gone to a flow, then check, and then you only check things when you're moving that'll kill you, and you do everything else when you're stopped. That's kind of the theory behind them. So the checklists have really improved. Automation, good, until it isn't. I noticed some ladies walking in the room, so I can't use this as a woman's story, so I won't. But if you're using your cruise control to go to Duluth, it works really good until you get into traffic in Duluth, right? Then it becomes more hassle to turn it on and off. That's automation in a nutshell, if you've never used it. Automation is great until it isn't, and it helps to use. Briefings and external resources. I talked a little bit about external resources, but I didn't talk about briefings. We brief everything. Everything. We brief going to the bathroom, for God's sakes. It's the worst. Everything we do. We do a pre-departure briefing. Pilot flying briefs. Where are we going? And it's actually, you read from a card. We have the captain does the briefing for the first flight of the day. What are we going to do if there's depressurization? We're both going to put on our oxygen mask. We're both going to select 100%. We're both going to establish crew communication. And here's the horn, and we push the throttle lever forward. If you hear this horn, we're going to down our masks. The FAA makes us do that in the 737 since the Greeks went to sleep. So they still haven't gotten rid of it. So all of the Greeks lost an airplane due to hypoxia, or due to the crew not getting their oxygen masks on. So we do that every time we depart. Before every flight, we have to say, if the oxygen horn goes on, we have to in a 737, okay? That's a briefing, but the briefings also go through the flight. Before we get to top of descent, I mentioned going into Punta Cana. We're getting ready to brief it. We brief the arrival. We brief every single fix. We brief every single altitude. We brief the approach. We brief the inbound. We brief the whole Jeff's chart all the way down. Brief, 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 brief. Old guys hate it until you realize it really is a good setup for success as you go in. And then the last one is knowledge and techniques, and that is, what do you bring? What do you bring to the game? Well, I bring 18,600, and I think I did my math the other day, 18,658 hours in a 737. I can start it in my sleep. I can tell you what it sounds like when it burps and it farts. I can tell you when you taxi, if you're going faster than 22 knots and you turn to the right, the toilet seat will go down. But if you're under 22 knots, it won't. It's a true fact. So you can hear it clunk in the back. The resource blocks are there, and I went through those. They're there actually to help you do the next step, which is the ABCDs. The ABCDs, again, when I first started doing this, I was like, boy, this is a safety guy's dream to come up with all these metaphors. But ABCD does work, and it's assess. When you're in the green and you're moving into the yellow, you need to assess. And what you're assessing and what you're looking at when you're assessing is not just SA, not where's an airplane in relation to me? Where is the lake in relation to me as far as being in a foot? It's yourself. It's the other people in the airplane. It's the weather. It's the airplane itself. How's it acting? What's going on? You've got to constantly assess, and you're doing it all the time, and you're assessing what's going on, and you're also using what you know before you left. And I'll give you an example at the airline. I knew before I left Punta Cana to go to Chicago, I had an airplane that had a minimum equipment list item that limited me to not being able to do a GPS approach. Okay? So, going into Chicago Midway Airport, the ILS was out of service and they were doing GPS approaches. So, that whole way up, I had to constantly assess, because something had changed in my environment, whether I'm going to have minimums to get in or out. Now, that could also be a distraction, because I noticed when I was doing that I wasn't paying attention to fuel or doing something along that line. So I handed it off to the FO a couple times and said, I'll tell you what, every hour, I get the first hour, you get the second hour, keep checking the weather in Midway. And then I pinged my dispatcher and said, hey, if the weather goes down below this, please let us know, because we're going to need to think about diverting, and we're going to be squishy on gas anyways. So we're constantly assessing. Balance. That means when things start happening, the next action you have to do is start balancing what's going on in your world. Start balancing between, I'm worried about this approach, I'm really thinking about it, now I got to get the ATIS. They just gave me lower. Oh crap, now the flight attendant's digging me in the back. And all of a sudden you look over, and in our case, we got to use the resources, and I'll look over to the first officer, hey, can you get the ATIS? I know you're flying, but I'm loaded up over here. Can you get that? And you start balancing it out. And you've always got to consider, as you're going along, and in your balancing, what are the additive conditions? Again, what's causing all of these problems? And communicate. Easy for airline guys. Biggest distance in the world is between the distance in communication. When you listen to the CVR on Rex, you can't believe one guy's saying something and the other guy's not hearing him. If you listen to the CVR in post-flight and you listen to it. We also do it in communicate. We also do it in training when we debrief. And you can't believe, you're like, really, you told me that? Yeah, I told you that the hydraulic pump was overheating. And you're like, huh, when did you tell me that? Well, right about the time you were loaded up doing this, X. You'll be amazed at what you missed. So when you communicating amongst the crew, and again, we'll talk about this in general aviation and what a challenge it is for you, communicating with air traffic control, communicating in our case with dispatch, communicating and also with flight attendants also becomes a big deal. And then do and debrief. Do is do exactly what you're setting yourself up. Take that action. Hand off getting the weather to this guy. Tell dispatch to take care of this problem. Do this, do this, do this. When you're balancing, you're taking that action and you're doing it. And the last one is debrief. And a lot of guys miss this. And training has notoriously missed this in the past and is now picking it up. When we're all getting our ratings, we're all working on whatever it is, you get out of the airplane and you just did your series of stalls and all that stuff, and the flight instructor says, see you later. And every once in a while they kind of stop you and they would kind of, well, what did we do today? And they'd give a little debrief. What we've learned in training, especially at the airlines, is that debriefing is critical. And I can tell you that I got the whole crew together down in Punta Cana after we had our incident going in where the flight attendant was grabbed and all those types of things. We debriefed it with the whole crew. And I sat there and I wrote down everything because I wanted to make a proper report, make sure nobody got in trouble. That's what we do 90% of the job at the airline, is not trying not to get in trouble. But I also want to find out what happened. How did I do? How did the first officer do? Did you guys get what you needed in the back? And then everybody's got their manual open. Are we doing it the way we're supposed to do it? And then now can we put it in writing so we don't get in trouble? So there's a little bit of butt covering there, but debriefing does help you for the next time it happens. So as general aviation, I just told you about the airline and how we've evolved and where we're at today. So in general aviation, how does this apply? I told you all about my airline stuff and about all the cool stuff I do at the airline. It's really great. It's really fun. I've owned an aircraft sales and leasing business for years. I did a aviation TV show where I got to fly tons of different airplanes. I've owned many different types of airplanes. I've flown everything from privately pressurized Barons. I was checked out to fly a P-51. I own and part of a T6 right now, and I fly that Warbird right now. And I do a lot of neat things in general aviation. What I found is that when I started accepting, not that it's a religion, but started looking at risk-based flying and started accepting it at the airline and looking at it from a little bit more accepting turn, I found out that some of it started applying to my general aviation flying. And can this model work for you? Can this come into your cockpits, and can this help you guys move along? Again, the target, the resource blocks, the actions, and the return to the green. That's what we're looking to do. So what are your resource blocks? What are your policies? What are your flows? And what are your limits? We're going to do it a little bit backwards. We talked about the target first. I'm going to talk about the resources first on the general aviation side. What are your resources? Well, I'll pick on Matheson because he's sitting there. M&M flies a ton of different airplanes, all right? If he has a policy, it's going to be that he flies an amphib, and he may have a weather minimum. He may have a wind limit if it's a new airplane. It may be an airplane that just came out of the shop. He's not going to go so far away from an airport. He's got his own little set of policies. Doesn't write them down, but he lives by them. And for student pilots, when you're a student pilot, they actually do write them in your logbook. You can only fly with this much crosswind. So when you get that minted little check ride thing, should you erase that and put a 4 in front of it? No. You should probably assess yourself and know what your limits are and what are your policies. What are your flows? And the reason I brought this in is that every single airplane that I fly, from that P-51 that I was lucky enough to fly, to my T-6, to a Beaver, to the Baron that I fly, and to the 737, I do flows. And what I've tried to do is create my own set of flows that mirror what, like an airline or like a standard. The first thing I do when I get in an airplane is I sit down, I look down, I turn the fuel on. I love fuel. Without it, you don't go very far. So I always turn the fuel on. First thing I do when I sit down in an airplane, that's my flow. I may check it later, but that's my flow. What's the next thing I do? I reach down and I check all the circuit breakers, wherever they are. Sometimes they're down here, sometimes they're over here, and in the T6, I don't even know if there is one. So, I bet there is one, but boom, check it, all right? Then I check to make sure all my flight controls are now free to be manipulated. So I take out my control lock, all right? I take my control lock out and I make sure that my rudder pedals are adjusted and everything's in place, and I move stuff. Then I kind of get off my flow and I start going aircraft specific. And then maybe I'll turn on, in a G1000 airplane, I'll turn on a standby battery, so I start getting my avionics fired up. In the Baron, I need to get it going because I need the AHRs to get lined up, and so we get all that happy stuff in there. In the T6, the master switch is one of the last things you turn on. But then I start going aircraft specific from there. But I do have my general flow. So what can I do as a GA pilot to do that? And if you do that in your airplanes, you're going to do that. The 5P rule, proper pre-flight preparation prevents piss poor performance, 5 Ps, all right? Everybody's laughed about that and said it for years, but it applies to risk resource management. What are the things you can do procedure-wise before you get to the airport, when you get to the airport, when you first sit in that airplane? What are the standard things you should do? Should you first learn the weather and the altimeter setting when you turn on the ATIS? Maybe. But if you're leaving and you're going on a long flight, should you be watching the weather for a day or two? Yeah, it's going to be a lot longer flight. So you're going to be doing that. So bring that in so that you're doing it. I'll talk a little bit about checklists because I bought and sold a lot of airplanes. I think my record is 5. I bought a Baron and I found 5 different checklists in the airplane. They're all over. One guy's made by, one guy's made his own, one guy's made this one, and one guy's made that one. They all need to be based on the POH. And they all need to check all the proper things. Some flying clubs have their own to protect their airplanes, some have some stuff. But make sure you're using a checklist that you're familiar with and that you've read through it and you understand where all the items are and what the limits and what you're checking. And then what automation do I have? I'll go to the T6. What do I have in the T6 that's automated? I mean, there's like 6 moving parts and I'm one of them, So there's not a whole bunch of automation there. But what do I have that's automation in the T6 that I can bring along? I bring my iPad. I put it on a knee board, I pre-program the airport I'm at, I get all my frequencies, I line them up, and I know exactly what's going on because I'm going to go fly formation. I need to have all the stuff briefed up and all those things ready to go. So I do have automation, even in the T6. And when you have automation, again, it works until it doesn't. So I'm going to teach my son here to fly, and he's going to learn to fly in a G1000 182. Isn't he lucky? No, I think he's crippled. Because I fly with guys in 737s right now that have never in their career or their training flown anything but a glass airplane. Think about that. They've never seen a round dial. The only round dial they've ever looked at is for standby instruments, and they've never flown off of them. So you've got to look at your automation and figure out and know what's there. Briefings on the ground before departure and before takeoff and before top of descent. What are the briefings? I told you about ours at the airline, but what's yours? Okay, you're cruising along and you're going to come into Anoka. You've been in here 100 times. Okay, you turn on the ATIS and you just leave it up with the squelch on, and you get it as early as you can. You know it's going to be 55. They might change it, but it's a summer day, so it's not going to change a whole lot. Get it done early. Get it done early. Find out what runway they're going to be doing. Think through and kind of brief yourself. It's going to be a left downwind entry. It's a Saturday. It's going to be busier than hell. I need to have all this stuff. I'm going to switch tanks right now and take that out of the equation. And what you do is you're setting yourself up for success. And what are those things you can do before top of descent? What are those things you can do before takeoff? If you're in a float plane, what are the things you can do before you leave the dock? And what are the things you can do after you leave the dock before you put the power to it and get up on step? And then pre-brief the airspace, the freaks, and the runways. I talked about Punta Cana. It's hard to pre-brief Punta Cana because they don't even know what you're going to do. So let alone how are you going to know what you're going to do. But when you're coming into the Class B airspace in Minneapolis and you want to go through it, 50 miles out you need to get that frequency set. Why? You could go 100 flights and never have a problem not getting that frequency set. But the day you don't set it is the day you start having oil pressure issues. And all of a sudden, boom, your focus starts going to that oil pressure gauge. Wow, I wonder if it's the gauge. And the old difference between if you're a renter and an owner, you know the difference in an aircraft owner and an aircraft renter? When the engine quits, the aircraft renter says, geez, I hope I'm not going to die. And the owner says, geez, I wonder what this is going to cost me. So that's the difference. But if you're pre-briefed and you're ready, as you're getting into higher workload airspace, it happens in general aviation, and it happens very fast. And it also happens to people who don't generally fly a whole bunch, or they aren't in that situation a lot. So take care of what you can and those are your resource block. And honestly, what's my knowledge, skill, and technique? Where am I at? Where am I at? One of the challenges for airline people is we go out to the airport, we get checked out in a tail dragger or something. And you show up with a flight instructor and he thinks you're, holy God, you've got 18,000 hours. Yeah, I can't taxi this damn thing. You know more about this airplane than I do, so you need to teach me. So you need to constantly be assessing your knowledge, your skills, and your technique. I mentioned I fly a Baron. I can tell you that Baron on one engine is harder to fly than the 737. I have 22,000 pounds of thrust on each side of the 737, and that Baron, I lost the turbo on it one day. I went from 42 or 40 inches down to 29. I had my foot to the floor and pulling the good one back, and I still couldn't hold it straight. That was eye-opening. So I need to assess and know my skill level in that airplane isn't up to where it needs to be. Fly, talk, write, switch tanks, charts. What are the things you're doing in task loading? What are your additive conditions? What are the things that are going on with your spouse, your kids, your wallet? Remember I said, oh God, how much is this going to cost me? How many of us have pushed fuel trying to save 15 cents a gallon to get on that spot where AirNav said the gas was cheap? And of course then you get there and you go, well, nobody updated the AirNav. I guess it's more expensive here. All right, so you're doing all those additive conditions. I took my daughter to Winnipeg in the Barron for a hockey tournament. I'm coming back, and my good friend back here was working at Brainerd, and I really wanted to go to Brainerd to get gas. And I'm about 15 miles out, and I'm like, why am I pushing gas to get to Brainerd? And I'm kind of questioning myself, and I took a risk that I didn't need to take. I wasn't going to run out of gas, but I ended up shooting a pretty crappy approach in there. And doing those types of things, but I didn't look at my additives. When you show up at the airplane, what's your mood? What's your health? What's your mindset? What's your schedule? And what's your fatigue? Are you in a hurry? Everybody's heard of get there itis, and they run into large immovable things because they were in a hurry. All of those types of things. It's amazing at the airline. We have self-reporting, and when we look at that self-reporting, we look at it. You can almost always add this statement right at the beginning that said, "And I was in a hurry. We were running late. I was trying to make my commuter flight." All those things that say hurry, hurry, hurry are usually followed by mistakes. I talked to a real good friend of mine, and he quit flying his own airplane the day he taxied out with his briefcase sitting on top of the elevator. He was in no mindset to fly that airplane. He had so much business stuff going on. When he crawled in the airplane, he kind of did this and went, oh yeah, now I got to fly. That was the day he needed to move to the back of the airplane and drink champagne and and do his thing. A lot of us don't have that chance, but it may be 10 minutes to clear your head. Maybe 10 minutes to go over to the briefing computer and act like you're typing in the computer and you know what you're doing and looking at weather, but whatever it is. Then your actions. Assess. Where am I? Am I in Class B airspace? Am I in flying into the Bahamas for the first time? Where am I? Assess what's going on. Note your errors. Everyone can say, pilots are bad at this. I didn't make that. I didn't miss that radio call. He just didn't say the right call sign. Note your errors. Note when you're starting to hear the controller's voice tone change to you. Note when you're starting to go, oh crap, I got to change fuel tanks. Note those things and assess yourself and identify your resources and start looking around. A passenger can be a good resource. Can you read this checklist to me? They love to do stuff like that. And that'll make sure you're doing it right, and it'll actually bring them into the cockpit a little bit. Divide your attention and prioritize. You're all by yourself, so you have to really prioritize. Most of the time you're by yourself. You may have another pilot with you, which is actually more dangerous sometimes, we all know. But you can hand off duties. Who can you hand them to as a general aviation pilot? I said it once. You know what, Flying Cloud? You read me the weather. You know what, Flying Cloud? What's the base of the Class B airspace here? You know what, Minneapolis Center? Can you give me the weather for Winnipeg? I'm having a hard time flying the airplane right now. On down the line. Hand them off. Hand them to your partner who's with you, if you've got somebody that knows what's going on. And if you can't balance it, prioritize and know what's important. Fly the airplane. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Tell others. If you're by yourself in the cockpit, there's only one other person you can do. There's always somebody home at 21.5. Always somebody home at 21.5. General aviation guys don't fly around with that on very much. We spend our whole life at the airline with that thing on number 2 radio and on. 121.5, we monitor it. And you'd be amazed at what you hear on 21.5. I saved a crew of riverboaters who had a broken collarbone. They were in the canyon, and they knew looking straight up they saw a jet, and they broadcast on 21.5. So we were able to get them a rescue. Didn't get anything out of it, but typical airline guy wanted something free out of it, but we didn't get anything out of it. All right, so communicate. Clarifying question. If you don't understand what somebody just told you, and I'm talking about, I was going into Long Prairie the other day in the Barren to go look at an airplane. And I had a student pilot on the pattern, and he told me everything from what color shoes he had on and what shirt he was wearing and how many hours he had, except for he kept telling me that he was on the downwind base. And I'm going, well, I'm going to go straight in because I'm paying for the gas. And I really want to get there. And I'm just going to, are you in the pattern? Yeah, I'm in the pattern. Where are you? I'm a downwind base. I go, well, are you close to landing? So I'm clarifying with him where he was. Turned out he was at a different airport, but that's a whole long story. So he didn't realize that 22.7 worked at other airports. So I felt a little silly afterwards too. So I went in and landed and did my stuff. A clarifying question, controllers, other pilots, yourself. How far do you want to run that tank down? Okay? I come from a long line of run the tank. The only way to know if it's empty is run it till it starts spitting or the fuel pressure starts going down, right? But if you have your wife in the Barren, she doesn't like it when the engine starts spinning and sputtering, does she? No, she doesn't like that. Almost as much as when the little window opens in the back when she bumps against it. That's really not either. Execute, fly the plane, and I'm going to say debrief yourself, and I'm going to hit this one really hard before I finish. Debrief yourself. Honestly, when you get done, when you get the bejeepers scared out of you in an incident, the first thing you want to do is deflect. The first thing you want to do is say, yeah, wasn't for superior airmanship and, pure freaking magic, I wouldn't be here. No, that's not it. What did you do wrong before you left? And be honest, because when we looked at those US air crashes, you have to be honest. Those weren't pilots killing people. Those were situations killing people, but pilots were involved in it. What did you have to do with your situation that you can change and you can rinse and repeat? And then that means maybe it's, I took off and I went to put the gear up on a float plane and I thought the gear went up, but the gear didn't go up. Why? Because the circuit breaker was popped. Did you check the circuit breaker before you left? I thought I did. Well, maybe they were popping when you got into the airplane. Maybe it was a maintenance thing. And maybe you didn't check it. Maybe you need to look at something different and debrief. So that's how you move from red to green. And is that red green or is that Mark Matheson there? See? There's Mark Matheson, my hero. He's sitting right there. I knew him. That's why I made him come. But the life lesson, if you can walk out of here, is this, is the airlines went from testing, checking, and doing all those things, and now we've gone to risk resource management. We do a lot of loft flying, we do a lot of briefings, we do a lot of those things. The general aviation world is heading that way. The new practical test standards, yep, it's not about show me a stall. It's about go out, train on what causes stalls. It's not show me a stall, it's where do you stall? When do you stall? How do you recover from a stall? What are the risks in a stall? Where do you, what's going on? When you go take your check ride now, your check ride is going to be based on risk management. You're still going to have to demonstrate the skills just like we do at the airline, but you're also going to be tested on your judgment. So what you're seeing here in the modeling and all of those things that I was talking about is going to start creeping into your world. And the last thing I'll leave you with is if you take a biannual every 2 years, and you're not a flight instructor, you have to take one, my challenge to you is to go to an instructor who doesn't just sign your logbook in the bar and pat you on the back and say that was great. My challenge to you is to go out and find someone who's a little bit briefed and knows about risk resource management, and go for a flight and go for a training experience like the younger kids are going to get now, where instead of going through the practical test standards and going, stall, soft field, short field, all that, they're actually going to learn risk and resource management as part of their training, so that as they move through their flying career, whether it be private or commercial, they do their thing. So that's all I have. If anybody has any questions or anybody wants a link to buy the flight line, just let me know. But we can do that. So thank you very much for paying attention, and I hope you got something out of it.